Hi everyone and welcome to my virtual presentation about my graduation project, which I called Facilitating the Transition Towards Desired Behavior in the ICU. I did this project in collaboration with the LUMC, which is an academic hospital in Leiden, and I did this project specifically for the intensive care unit. So about the ICU. At the ICU they treat vitally threatened patients who cannot survive without daily intensive treatment. As you can imagine, these patients are also highly unstable and can easily deteriorate and also, in worst case scenario, pass away. So because of their instability, the staff members at the ICU need to be capable to act rapidly sometimes and also make decisions in a short period of time. As a result, it could be that they make human errors, and these human errors can cause adverse events, which are situations during which the patients suffer harm which is not reversible. So in order to minimize these human errors, the staff members are being trained by two training exercises, which focus primarily on behavior and non-technical skills. These training exercises are called ALS Plus and CRM. The ALS Plus training, during the ALS Plus training, the staff members need to perform several simulated scenarios which are specifically aimed for the ICU. For instance, like intubations or resuscitations. During the CRM training, they gain a more deepening understanding about which factors affect teamwork and how they can, as an individual, establish more effective teamwork. So although they need to perform and participate with these training exercises, the trainers of the ALS Plus and the CRM training still notice that there's a difference between what they expect from the staff members and the actually shown behavior. So you could basically say that the main aim of this project was to minimize this gap and work towards more desired behavior in the ICU. So initially, the department asked me to map all processes that take place during practice and also during training settings. And eventually, by making a comparison between both situations, I could provide them with recommendations on how to improve the ALS Plus and the CRM training. But I wasn't so sure if that was actually the case, that the current setup of the ALS Plus and the CRM training are the main cause of this difference. So I wanted to keep an open mind and also focus on other factors. So first off, I asked myself, okay, well, what are these desired behaviors? Because currently there was no clear-cut definition given yet. So I had to find it out first. Second, besides the current training exercise, I also wanted to look at other factors that could be involved during the transition of desired behavior in the ICU. So besides this twofold problem definition, I also only wanted to focus on the ICU staff members, the management, but also on the ALS Plus CRM trainers and training developers. And at last, I only wanted to focus on active procedures, because these are the type of procedures that are being performed during the ALS Plus training, and in that way I could make a good comparison. So during the previous months, I focused on a lot of topics, did a lot of exploration, and eventually that led me to a design vision, eventually a design direction, which I further developed and now presenting during this presentation. So what about the ICU? The ICU consists of 6 subunits. And for this project I focus primarily on the ICU 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, because they only treat adult unstable patients, which are also being targeted during the ALS Plus training. Second, I focus on the stakeholders that are involved. So besides the ICU physicians and nurses, there can also be specialists present in the ICU, but also of course the patients and their accessory families. And third, I look at the daily activities to understand the needs of these main stakeholders, but also learn more about their culture, how are the cultural factors involved, by looking at hierarchy and the safety climate that is present. So although I focused, so besides the daily practices, you also have these active procedures, and these are completely different situations than their daily activities, based on urgency, but also on how they need to perform together and work as a team. So there are a couple of procedures that take place in the ICU. For instance, like I already mentioned, it could be that the patient needs to be intubated, but also, the worst case, he needs to be resuscitated. And otherwise, if it's not performed adequately, could pass away in worst case scenario. So besides this procedure, I also zoomed in on which team compositions are present during the procedure, and also what are their tasks, what are their responsibilities, and try to understand how the context will look during these procedures. And at last, I tried to gain a more theoretical understanding of what shapes teamwork. Well, I found out that teamwork during these procedures consists of 4 pillars: communication, leadership, situational awareness, and decision making. And these 4 pillars are being shaped by attitude, as this is how you present these principles towards your fellow team members. How do you communicate this? So after I mapped and analyzed all these procedures taking place both in practice as in training setting, I could make this comparison. But during the observation I made of the CRM training, I was told that the trainers primarily they only want to create awareness, and that gave me little room to make significant improvements. So I kind of neglected the CRM training and moved on and focused more on the ALS Plus training. So by comparing practice with training, I focus on 3 topics. So first off, I tried to figure out if there's any difference in the sequence of steps that are being followed during the procedures. Second, I also tried to figure out, are there any differences in the team composition? Is the team does it consist of the same team members, and do they perform the same tasks and carry the same responsibilities as well? And last, I also wanted to look at the influence of hierarchy, if there are any differences in that as well. So I found out that basically in practice and training setting, these procedures follow a similar sequence, but there's a slightly difference in how they kick off. So in practice, the nurse, usually this procedure starts when a nurse notices that her patient, his or her patient, one of his body functions is decreasing, is getting worse. So she has to get her assistants to perform and help this patient to stabilize and to treat this patient as well. And after that, the procedure will start. But in training setting, these procedures start differently. The team gets briefed by the trainers, and then at that point everyone has the same amount of knowledge about this patient, which is also different than in practice, because only the assigned physician and nurse have a significant amount of knowledge about this patient. But from that point on, the procedures follow a similar sequence. So they're working towards the end, trying to diagnose what is wrong with the patient, what caused his harm, and then try to set up a treatment plan and treat the patient until he is stable, or in worst case he could also get worse and pass away. So although they follow a similar sequence, there are also some differences involved between practice and training. For instance, in practice there are also always more than one physician. Present. In training setting, there's only one physician present, and you can imagine that with 2 physicians on board, there are also 2 leaders involved, and that could shift the team dynamics. But at the end, when I analyzed both situations, I must admit that both the ALS Plus and the CRM training actually already are satisfactory. So then the question was still, how could I close the gap? Well, I tried to figure out and wanted to look at how do you establish behavioral change. And then I found this interesting model. According to this model, behavior will be established by 3 parameters: ability, motivation, and triggers. And triggers are actually reminders that will remind you why you have to show this behavior. Why do you want to do that? Well, during the ALS Plus training, I noticed that the staff members are already capable to perform the desired behaviors, but it's still not happening all the time. So it must be about motivation and triggers. And I thought especially these triggers are very, very interesting, because these triggers offer lots of design opportunities. You can actually design this trigger. How do you want to remind the staff members about the desired behaviors? So rounding up the exploration phase, I found 4 key factors that influence the transition towards desired behavior. But first off, what is this desired behavior? Well, it cannot be defined as one particular behavior. It's also completely different in what ICU physicians need to show and what the nurses need to show, because they also have really different tasks and responsibilities during these procedures. Also, I found out that each procedural phase or action and step requires a different behavior as well. So you can imagine that during the procedure, the step members need to be flexible in showing different types of behavior, because otherwise no effective teamwork will be established. So during this transition towards this desired behaviors, as I said, four factors are involved. First off, these accurate procedures do not take place very often. It was mentioned during some interviews that several nurses didn't perform a resuscitation in months. So it could be, as you can imagine, once they haven't performed these procedures in a while, their effectiveness and their knowledge will decrease very rapidly. Second, also during these interviews I found out that although they mentioned that leadership is important or communication is important to establish a very effective procedure, none of the staff members could link this to these specific steps or specific phase of the procedure. So there was still little awareness about their behavioral impact. Third, after these procedures take place, the staff members are expected to debrief the situation, which means that they need to evaluate and discuss what went outstanding and what went wrong. And also after this, they are expected to formulate some kind of action point, so something they need to keep in mind during following procedures. However, they have a really hard time to really make these action points concrete, and when they do this, it was shown that they do not apply them during following procedures, so that was something to keep in mind. At last, because these procedures also do not take place very often and they only need to participate with the ALS Plus and CRM training in maybe 2 or 3 years, they are barely triggered to reflect on their behavior and also do not have lots of opportunities to apply their learnings into practice. So you can imagine that also their interest and their engagement to think about this stuff will also decrease very rapidly. So when I looked at these key factors, I found that these two are actually most important to formulate my design vision. And this is how I formulated my design vision. So I wanted to focus on creating this continuous awareness, to trigger them to reflect on their behavior more often, more frequently, and also offering the stimulants or some ways to apply their action points into practice. So based on this design vision, I formulated my design direction, which I call the individual-oriented training program, which allows the staff members to train one specific non-technical skills, because now they cover everything, and it could be that the staff members only want to train one particular skill. And at last, this training program should also be accessible at all times, and it could be in any shape. It could be by a role play again, but also maybe via an application. It was still open at that point. So I came up with this training program, but it was still unclear to me, how can I close this gap? I looked at this behavioral change, it was still unclear, so I had to take a step back. And then I thought, well, closing the gap will mean that the non-technical skill set of the staff members need to be increased. And I believe that it could be achieved by following a repetitive learning cycle. So instead of just focusing on an individual training program, I also looked at other pillars. So what will establish this learning cycle, and how will it make sure that they will show growth? So first off, after this accurate procedures take place, they also need to reflect on their behavior. After this reflection, they need to come up with some action points, and then afterwards they can train on the specific action points. After this, they also need to show some growth, or they need to notice that their effort is being rewarded. And then this learning cycle will repeat again. So after I found out which learning cycle needs to be followed, I also wanted to take a step back and look at my design vision again. So I told you guys I tried to create this continuous awareness. So I believe that I could create this continuous awareness by integrating the final solution of this project into something the staff members already use or interact with on a daily basis. So I looked at which are the products and tools or activities they already do every day. So for instance, they work with medication and supplies every day, but also have to work on computers or divide the patient around these patient boards. So there were also lots of opportunities there. And eventually I believe that these repetitive learning cycle could be achieved by looking at or integrating the final solution into an application and a patient board or a poster. So during the design process, I maintained an agile approach, which meant that I wanted to make really brief, short iterations and test a lot with the main users. In this case, the ICU staff members and the trainers. So at the start of this design process, I had to come up with a minimum viable product, which allowed me to test, which was which contained enough features to test the opinions of the main users. So I created this minimum viable product by creating mind maps and think about the sequence of steps and interfaces and try to design the interfaces. And then afterwards, at last, I wanted to make multiple iterations on the graphical style of the application. So these are the steps I followed. So at first I came up with the design and features. Then I defined several research questions which I could ask to the main user during test sessions, evaluate what the results are, and eventually come up with different improvements, and then move on to the new iteration. So eventually I came up, following from all this iteration, I came up with a new initiative, with a final solution which I believe is more of an initiative than a product solution, and I called this initiative iCare. And iCare consists of 4 product solutions, which mainly aim to individually develop your non-technical skill set, trigger you to reflect on your own behavior, and offer stimulus as well. So it consists of an application, a pocket card, debriefing flyers, and a new renewed digital patient board. So first off, the application. So as said, this application exposes which non-technical skills need to be improved. So it makes it more tangible what you need to work on, but also how you're growing over time. And also provides some more direct link between the staff members and the trainer. Nowadays, they are only communicating together when they need to participate when the ALS Plus or the CRM. So they're now more engaged with each other as well. So what can you do with the application? So first off, you can structure your debriefing. It shows different statements that will trigger you to zoom in on the right topics during these discussions. But also after these procedures take place, it shows how your non-technical skill set is evolving over time. And third, once you notice that some non-technical skills need to be improved, you can do this in 2 ways. So first, the application shows multiple example videos with clear, tangible examples on which behaviors are required or desired during the acute procedures. But second, you can also schedule a training at any moment you want. And you can participate with some other people who also need to train a bit more. At fifth, the application also shows which learnings are relevant at that point. So you can share your information and experience with each other. And now that's something they actually don't do. And at last, the trainers can actually control which information is shown via the patient boards, as they are also linked to the application. So second, the digital patient boards. So as said, these patient boards mainly aim to create awareness and trigger their staff members to reflect on their own behavior and try to keep busy with this continuously. So they're actually these patient boards are already consisting, but now they are replacing them. So they also maintain a similar interface to increase interest and usability. As you can see, the same simplistic features are still involved, but they allow us to enter new information on the left side. So, as said, besides the application, you can also share these learnings and insights with each other via the patient board, which is a more sufficient way, in my opinion. At last, when these patient boards are in rest, currently, after they divided the patients, the staff members will not look at these patient boards anymore. But now, when these patient boards are in rest, they show multiple animations. First off, it shows which learnings are shared with each other, so you will be updated at any time available. And second, the patient boards can also show these animations that will trigger you to reflect on your own behavior. And once you're not sure about your case, you can scan these QR codes with the application and it will direct you towards these example videos, and afterwards you will be up to date again. So third, the pocket cards. I also wanted to add a really easygoing, accessible and physical tool which you can carry around all the time. And this was a sufficient way because they already used to this kind of product. So these pocket cards basically consist the top 10 most desired behaviors during accurate procedures. So they can use this as a preparation when their patient is unstable. And it also allows them to write down the action points and wipe them out when they're not relevant anymore, and then maybe write down new ones. And at last, the debriefing flyers. This is also a more sufficient way to evoke a more lively discussion during the debriefing, as you don't have to look at your phone anymore, but it basically consists of the same statements as presented in the application. So the whole initiative mainly aims for 3 scenarios, and I'll briefly discuss what these scenarios will look like. So first off, scenario 1 I call the unstable patient. So it could be that your shift starts, and before the shift starts you all round up in front of the patient boards, and then the patient will be divided. And at that point the team leader will mention that some of the patients are actually unstable and could easily deteriorate, so you already know what could happen. So as a preparation, you read down which action points are written down in the middle, because that will be important for the entire week. But also read your pocket card and your action points, and then will be prepared for in the case something happens. So indeed, in the course of the day, your patient becomes unstable and goes into an acute setting. But during this procedure you will remember how you prepared, and then the procedure will actually go very well and very smoothly. It will also come out during the debriefing, so you notice that you performed very well and that you knew what to do. So you could, instead of just focusing on the negative, it could also be that you want to continue with the behavior you just showed. And when you found something, you experienced something that should be you believe that could be shared with the entire department, you can also do this with the patient board. And then via a really sufficient way, the entire department will be notified. So the second scenario focuses on the animations that are shown by the patient board. So first off, as said, it could be that you're passing the patient board and you notice that there's some new information being presented. And then you were not aware of it, so you write it down and then you're up to date again. But it could also be that you read the animation which triggers you to reflect on your own behavior. And once you notice that the statements, you're actually not aware of it, you can scan the QR code and watch the example video, and then again you're also updated again and ready to go. Then scenario number 3. Scenario number 3 starts off with an accurate procedure which doesn't go that well, and you also notice this during the debriefing, and once you fill out your reflection by the application, you also see that one of your non-technical skills is actually decreasing, so you feel unsatisfied and you want to do something about it. So what you can do, you can either watch an example video and then also your knowledge is up to date again, but you can also schedule a new training exercise. For instance, an ALS Plus training, but also you can schedule a meeting with a personal trainer. So you can you can fill out your preferences. So maybe you want to focus on leadership, and during the ALS Plus training, these will be the main focus of all scenarios. So after a while, it happens that you again need to perform this procedure, but because you trained on this particular skill, you notice that it goes actually way more smoother than before, and then again you feel satisfied. So I came up with all this product solution, but I still believe that I think that the ICU is not ready yet for such product solution, because they do not have the right mindset yet. Nowadays they don't really reflect on their behavior. They're also still kind of skeptical about it. So when these product solutions will be implemented, it should be really you should really maintain a gradual approach. So this is where they're currently at. So they just they're already providing the ALS Plus training for quite a while, but they just launched the CRM training. So after they all follow this CRM training, I believe that they're already in a kind of good mindset, and then you can try to launch the iCare initiative and accessory with the patient, with the pocket cards and the debriefing flyers. Once they get more familiar with reflecting on their behavior and thinking more about this stuff, you can try to implement the patient board, because they're still easygoing and accessible. And afterwards, when that will be a success, then you can launch the application and the entire initiative will be implemented. So looking back at my whole process and looking at the final solution I came up with, I believe that the iCare initiative is satisfactory. Although it's kind of, what I came up with is slightly different than the initial design direction I came up with, I still is more of the missing link between the current situation and working towards an individual-oriented training program, as it exposes which non-technical skills needs to be improved. Also, I think the entire initiative is well integrated in the ICU context. As said, the staff members are pretty skeptical and also do not have a lot of time to perform additional tasks, so it had to be really optional and accessible, and I believe these product solutions will cover these needs. So although I believe that the iCare initiative is already satisfactory, I think there's still several improvements that could be applied to really strengthen the initiative in the future. For example, so I came up with the patient boards at a pretty late stage of the process, and as a result I didn't have enough time to fully develop the interaction between the patient board and the application. But I still think that there are lots of opportunities there to really increase their value to the staff members. So this should be something that the department should look into in the future. Second, during the process I focused primarily on its accurate procedures. But during the test sessions I noticed that several staff members had a hard time to understand the information that is presented on all product solutions. By also integrating this information that is relevant to the daily practices, I think the usability and understandability of all product solutions will be increased, and the interest amongst the staff members will also be increased. And third, I think that the initiative can also be strengthened by integrating some of its features into the programs that the staff members are already using on a daily basis, which are PDMS, Metavision or HIGS. As they are already using these products on a daily basis, they can also fill out some of the, integrate some of the features into these programs. For instance, it could be that PDMS also shows animation or offers a tab where they can fill out the debriefing as well. Fourth, as said, I didn't really come up with an individual-oriented training program, but I think it can still be valuable to the staff members and to the trainers as well. During the design process, I already asked the staff members what I thought about integrating some of the training features into the application, but they were not that keen on it. So I think the ICU should look into different ways to offer this individual training program. For instance, they can look at possibilities to they can look into the possibilities of VR and AR, augmented reality and virtual reality, but also maybe come up with a training facility that allows to actually individually train without the use of trainers or other team members. But I must say that both possibilities will require lots of development costs. So the ICU should really consider if it's actually worth it to look into these possibilities. And at last, the ICU should look into ways to really increase the engagement with this initiative, because at the beginning these staff members will still be critical and skeptical towards these product solutions. And I believe that they can do this by looking into 3 ways. So first off, they should look into ways to reward the staff members when they engage with this with the initiative, but also really showing which tangible results and how the department is evolving and improving over time due to this initiative. And last, they can also set up unexpected stage accuracies in the department itself, because they already have this training facility, but they do not use it yet. And then also still lots of opportunities there to really engage more and also expose why it's so important to think about these non-technical skills. So we're really considering this last recommendation I came up with. I think the iCare initiative will be a really success in the future and will really accelerate this transition towards more desired behavior in ICU. And yeah, thank you very much guys. This was my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and take care and stay safe. Bye bye.